Azumanga Daioh, the textbook anime of brain rot, is a highly recommended show by those who have watched it. I myself have seen many snippets of different episodes, but I personally have never watched it. Until now. A while back, I asked my friend who has watched Azumanga Daioh if it's the equivalent to baby sensory videos, and he said you can just pick an episode at random and you'll be fine. But will you? I want to test that theory. But before I get to the meat and potatoes of this video, I must clarify a few things. Azumanga Daioh has 26 episodes, which has an average time of 25 minutes per episode, while including the intro, the outro, and a sneak peek of the next episode. That means if I were to split this up into 2 days, I would end up watching Azumanga Daioh for a little over 5 hours for both days. Am I willing to make this sacrifice? Apparently not. This video was supposed to come out Friday. I've spun a wheel 26 times and got this list. This list consists of the order of episodes that I have to watch. Lastly, I will record myself watching these episodes and put in the best moments of the show, as well as any commentary I believe is useful towards this experiment. I will also have notes written down after each episode. The notes will consist of a few things: my overall rating of the episode, my likes and dislikes about the episode, whether or not context from a previous episode could have been useful, and whatever else I feel like could be useful towards this experiment. Now, without further ado, let's get to watching. Vegito! First episode of the first day was episode 2. My rating of this episode was a solid 8 out of 10. My likes was the intro, but I'm not going to put the intro every single time, so it's going to be the one time I put it. And then obviously Osaka. I couldn't think of any dislikes. This is the second episode, so context wouldn't have been useful. The second episode that I watched was episode 4. I rated it a 7 out of 10, and this was when they went to the pool. Well, the main thing that I liked from it was that Chiyo and Osaka couldn't swim. And my dislikes, this is gonna be put like twice throughout all the episodes, which was Mr. Kimura, which is kind of obvious. And would context have been useful? No, not really. It's the 4th episode, so it's still sort of quote unquote introductory. But for extra notes, so far it seems like my friend's statement still seems to be true, but there's still 24 episodes left to watch. The 3rd episode I watched was episode 11. I rated it a pretty good 9 out of 10. And my likes from it were Kagura's way of fending off the cats. Would context have been useful? Sort of. But that hole was quickly filled by a flashback to a previous episode when that one cat bit Sakaki for the first time. The next episode I watched was episode 10. I didn't really like it as much as the other episodes, so I rated it 6 out of 10. I did like that everyone was in the same class for their second year, because this was them going into their second year of high school. The one thing I didn't like about the episode was that Sakaki didn't get the kitten, and I don't believe that context would have been useful for the episode, but I do think it would be better to watch them in their first year before. The next episode I watched was episode 22. I rated it a pretty good 7.5 out of 10. My favorite thing from the episode was Yukaki's driving, and the very slight dislike I had was the reuse of the same jokes. Would I believe that context would have been useful? Sort of. At this point, I started to believe that the whole show is about a group of high schoolers make their way to graduation, and that I do believe it is intended to watch the show from the first episode. But at the same time, this is one of the first few episodes that I've watched, so I'll have to see what my final opinion is when I'm done with it. The next episode I watched was episode 25. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My 2 favorite things from this episode was Chiyo's prayer recharge and the suspense for the entrance exams. I couldn't think of anything I disliked throughout the episode, but I do believe that starting from here is a really bad idea, especially because they're about to take the final test so that they could graduate. So starting a show off at the end is one of the worst things you could do. The next episode I watched was episode 15. I rated it an 8 out of 10, and my favorite things from this episode were the obstacle course when Osaka went through it, and the start of the marathon when Tomo used all her energy at the start. I couldn't think of any dislikes for this episode, and I don't believe context would have been useful. It is definitely better to watch the first Sports Fest before this, but it would be more of a funny callback rather than something you're required to watch to understand what's happening. The next episode I watched was the first episode. I rated it an 8 out of 10. I personally thought it was a really good introductory episode, and I couldn't think of any dislikes. Next episode I watched was episode 18. I rated it a 9 out of 10, and my favorite thing from this episode was the conflict between Yomi and Tomo. I couldn't think of any dislikes, and I believe that context wouldn't be needed for this episode, and I do think that it's a great episode that can be watched at any point. Next episode I watched was episode 8. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My favorite thing was just the whole episode. I couldn't think of any dislikes, and I don't believe that context would have been used other than getting to know the characters. But other than that, no, I don't believe context could be useful. Next episode I watched was episode 12. I rated it a 9 out of 10. My favorite part of this episode was the jump roping scene near the end, and I do believe that context wouldn't be needed or information would be needed because all characters are introduced and no context from a previous episode is needed for a viewer to understand what is happening. The next episode I watched was episode 13. I rated it a 7 out of 10. My favorite thing from this episode were the knuckleheads. I couldn't think of anything I didn't like, and I don't believe that context would have been useful or information have been useful to fill in any gaps of the episode. The last episode for day 1 that I watched was episode 19. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My two favorite things from this episode was Little Tearful Diet Girl and the yawning practice. I couldn't think of anything that I didn't like, and I don't believe context would have been useful to fill in any gaps of the episode.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Fine, thank you.
The first episode of day 2 that I watched was episode 24. I rated it a 9 out of 10, and my favorite thing from this episode was Sakaki and Maya. I couldn't think of any dislikes throughout the episode, and I don't believe that context would have been useful, although it would have been good to watch the episode where they went to Okinawa to understand the connection between Sakaki and Maya. The next episode I watched was episode 5. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My favorite thing was the Yukari mobile. I couldn't think of any dislikes, and I don't think that context would have been useful to fill in any gaps or give information about aspects of the episode. The next episode I watched was episode 6. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My favorite thing from this episode was Yukari's competitiveness. I couldn't think of any dislikes from this episode, and I don't believe that context could have been useful to fill in any gaps. The next episode I watched was episode 7. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My favorite things from this episode were Kyo wearing the catsuit, Tomo running down the halls wearing the catsuit, and the victory parade. I couldn't think of any dislikes from the episode, and I don't believe that context would be useful to fill in any gaps of the episode. The next episode I watched was episode 9. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My favorite thing was Chiyo asking Sakaki for her height back. I couldn't think of any dislikes throughout the episode, and I don't believe that context would have been useful to fill in any gaps or give information about aspects of the episode. The next episode I watched was episode 23. I rated it an 8 out of 10. I couldn't think of anything specific that I liked about the episode because I thought the whole episode was great. I personally couldn't think of anything I didn't like about the episode, and I don't believe context would have been useful to fill in any gaps. However, watching the previous sports festival episodes beforehand could make things a little more humorous, but is not needed. The next episode I watched was episode 20. I rated it a 7 out of 10. I couldn't think of anything specific that I liked throughout the episode, but I didn't like Kimura throughout the episode, and I sort of believe that context could have been useful to fill in any gaps. It would definitely be best to watch previous episodes so you can understand that Chiyo skipped grades, that Kimura is a perv, and the crush that Kaorin has on Sakaki. The next episode I watched was episode 17. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My favorite things from this episode was the karaoke and the whole Christmas theme to the episode. I couldn't think of anything I disliked throughout the episode, and I don't believe that context would be useful to fill in any gaps of the episode. The last episode I watched for day 2 was episode 3. I rated it an 8 out of 10. My favorite thing was the conversation that Yukari had with that one American person. And since it is episode 3, context would not have been useful because this is an introductory episode about who the teachers are. And another thing I added was that the conflict between Yukari and Yama is really funny, and one of my favorite tropes in shows or games or whatever is two people being friends but being polar opposites of each other. Now for the first episode of day 3, I watched episode 16. I rated it a 9 out of 10, and my two favorite things from the episode was Chiyo's penguin costume and the battle to save the world. I couldn't think of anything specific that I liked about the episode, and I don't believe that context would have been useful or needed to fill in aspects of the episode. The next episode I watched was the final episode, episode 26. I rated it a full 10 out of 10. My favorite thing about the whole episode was just the episode itself, and this is definitely one of the episodes where you absolutely need context for this episode to make sense, because I personally think that watching the final episode before anything else would be a terrible idea, because you wouldn't have understood anything other than that this is a group of friends that just graduated high school. Next, I watched episode 21. I rated it a 9 out of 10. My 3 favorite things from this episode were the wildcat, the scuba diving scene, and Tomo and Yukari bullying Chiyo. I couldn't think of anything I disliked throughout the episode, and I don't believe that context would have been useful to fill in any gaps of the episode. The final episode that I watched was episode 14. I rated it a 9 out of 10. My favorite thing about this episode was Nyamo talking about her dating life and Chiyo not understanding anything that she was saying, and Osaka telling Chiyo that she'll understand what Nyamo was talking about when she grows older. I couldn't think of anything that I disliked throughout the episode, and I don't believe that context would have been useful to fill in the gaps or give any information about this episode. Now, I do believe that watching it in order is the intended way, just like any other normal person, so that you can understand who the characters are. However, if you have already watched the series, you can 100% just watch the episodes in random order or pick random episodes and just watch them. I myself will 100% go back and watch different episodes, but I do wish that I have watched the show in order beforehand. I do want to mention that there will always be errors in any experiment that you do. One of the errors that I had thought of while watching the show was that I was understanding the characters more and more as I watched it, so it would be better if I went in with no understanding of who the characters are for each episode. However, that's just something you can't really forget if you're watching it back to back. So to fix that, you could probably, without watching it, it would be best to pick one episode instead of watching the whole series. But for some final thoughts about the show before I end the video, I personally would rate Azumanga a really good 9 out of 10. It's definitely one of my favorite animes that I've ever watched. I really liked the comedy slice of life feel, and I really need to watch more slice of life comedies rather than just like Jujutsu Kaisen or One Piece. I need to hop off the action train for a little bit. Next, my favorite character has to be Tomo. I think that her being really energetic adds a lot to her character, as well as her being a complete moron half the time. I also do think that she is just really funny, but my favorite duo has to be Osaka and Chiyo. I would 100% recommend this to people who are looking for a comedy or a slice of life. And do I believe that my friend was correct? Depending on the episode that you choose, then yes, you could just pick an episode at random and be completely fine. But that's only if you haven't watched the show before. If you had watched the show previously, then yes, you could pick an episode at random and you'll be completely fine. Well, that's all I have for you today. Stay safe, be sure to pray, and if you go outside, bring pepper spray. I'll catch y'all later.